Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Unparalleled Universe for another action figure comparison, and in today's video we're taking a look at the brand new Marvel Legends Vintage Wave Classic Spider-Man, and we're going to see how he compares to the current king of 6-inch Spider-Man figures, which is the Mafex comic book Spider-Man. And if you just want to know exactly which one of these figures I like the most, feel free to jump to this point in the video, but if you're somebody that enjoys hearing me talk about action figures, you're in luck because there's a lot to discuss between these two figures. About a year ago, I did a video where I tried to determine my favorite comic book Spider-Man. It featured the Mafex version, it featured the Diamond Select Spectacular Spider-Man, the Marvel Legends Pizza Spider-Man, the Mezco 112 Collective Classic Spider-Man, and the Revoltech Spider-Man. And in that video, I came to the conclusion that the Mafex one was the best comic book Spider-Man that was available at that time. In fact, I don't even think it was close. The four other figures couldn't touch the Mafex one. He basically destroyed them all. And I kind of thought that was end of story, but then Hasbro came along and revealed this new Marvel Legends Spider-Man with the new articulation setup on the vintage card, and I was very excited about it. Right away, the first thing that jumped to my mind was I can't wait to compare him to the Mafex Spider-Man, and then I kind of thought about doing another one of the like who did it best type of things, but then I figured if the other four couldn't even touch the reigning champ, then what was the purpose of having a new challenger go against them as well? So I figured let's just take this new challenger, put him against the king, and see what happens. So here we are, we have the Marvel Legends Retro Spider-Man against the Mafex version, so let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so let's go ahead and start this off by talking about the overall look and designs of these two figures. I feel like both of them do a very good job of capturing a classic look for Spider-Man, but they both do it in very different ways. As you can see, the Mafex one is a lot slimmer, he's slender, he's lean, and it kind of reminds me of McFarlane era Spider-Man, or pretty much like 90s and beyond. I think from that point, he was drawn a lot skinnier than he was before. And the Marvel Legends one kind of feels like old school classic Spider-Man, where he was a little bit bigger, like Steve Ditko, like late Steve Ditko, and like John Romita Sr. A lot of those older artists would draw Spider-Man a little bit bigger, and I guess you could say like more super heroic, and I think this Marvel Legends one captures that better than the Mafex one does. But the Mafex one captures the look that it was going for perfectly well. I think that it looks really nice for like your 90s era Spider-Man, and I like it. I like the overall look of both of these figures a lot. And as far as the sculpting work goes, the Marvel Legends one does not have any sculpting work at all. Pretty much everything is just painted on. It's like a flat base body. The web lines are all painted on. The only sculpted detail we do have is on the head. You could actually feel the eyes. Those are sculpted on there, so that's cool. But aside from that, everything is just flat, and I don't have a problem with that. I do like the painted web lines. I think they do look good, but he does feel a little less unique than the Mafex one, because we're bound to get a bunch of different characters on this body, which is fine, but it makes it a little less special every time that happens. And with the Mafex one, we do have a bunch of sculpted web lines, which do look nice, but I wish that they used a little bit like darker paint so that the web lines kind of stood out a little bit more, because right here, if like they weren't sculpted, you couldn't see them. It's like there's no paint in some areas of the web lines. But I do love the way all the sculpted details look. The sculpted spider on the front and on the back, all of it looks really nice. All the muscle definition looks good on him, even though he's not like overly muscular. Like I said, he's very lean. He doesn't look as buff as the Marvel Legends one, and some people don't like that. They say he looks a little too puffy and too muscular for Spider-Man, but I do think he looks accurate for some eras of Spider-Man, and I really don't feel like he looks puffy or anything like that. I think the muscles look good on the Marvel Legends one, and it's really just a matter of preference when it comes to design, like as far as which look you like more and which era of Spider-Man you want to represent. One thing I will say is I do like the colors on the Marvel Legends one a lot more. I like the darker blue more than this metallic blue that they used on the Mafex one. That was one thing that a lot of people had complaints with when the Mafex one first came out, was that choice in the metallic blue. I wish they would have just went with like a light blue or a dark blue. I'm not a huge fan of the blue that they decided to go with. Obviously, I love the figure now, but I remember when it first came out, I was a little disappointed in the blue that they decided to go with. I wish they would have just went with the solid color, not with the weird metallic stuff. And I'm happy to see that that's what the Marvel Legends one did. And then there are a couple of things that put the Mafex one just head and shoulders over the Marvel Legends one in terms of the design, and that would be stuff like hiding the pegs. As you can see, the Marvel Legends one has these big red ugly pegs, and they didn't have to do that. Right now they're working on this whole pinless technology, and to be honest with you, I wish they would have waited to release this Spider-Man to give us that pinless technology, because it would have felt even more like an import figure. Right now as it is, it kind of feels very cheap with these red pegs, and obviously the Mafex one does not have anything like that. All the pegs are hidden on the Mafex figure, so they definitely get points there for that. And aside from that, I would say that both of these figures, I think both of these figures do their job. Oh, and one more thing I was a little disappointed with on the Marvel Legends one was the paint rub in the shoulders. Mine, I actually had to take it apart, repaint it, reseal it, and put it back together to try to get rid of that paint rub. For the most part, I don't have that problem anymore, so I'm happy with it. And it might just be because I got mine pretty early. I noticed a lot of people have been getting this Spider-Man lately, and I've been asking around about the paint rub in the shoulders on other people's figures. Most people say it's not really an issue, so maybe just on mine and a couple of the early ones that was a problem. But still, it's still part of the experience when I had this Spider-Man, and it's something that I was a little disappointed with. But the Mafex wasn't really perfect right out of the box either. I remember a lot of people really disliked the pelvis or the waist area because it had like that diaper kind of syndrome that a lot of Mafex figures have. Luckily on mine, I was able just to trim away at it little by little, and now I'm happy with it. At first, this was like huge, and it like covered a lot of the red on the lower part of the torso, and when you would crunch them forward, the red would completely disappear, and you'd have the blue like up here, and I really didn't like that. So I trimmed it down, and now I'm completely happy with the way it looks. So, you know, he wasn't perfect right out of the box either, and sometimes you just have to modify your figures. It's really not a big deal, but in some cases, it's a little bit easier, like when you're working with a $20 Marvel Legends versus a $90 import figure. So, you know, it is what it is. But anyways, as far as the overall look goes, I think I like the Marvel Legends one a little bit more because I like that old school classic Spider-Man. I like the bigger Spider-Man because it reminds me of when he was in the animated series, and that's the Spider-Man that I grew up on. And I also like the colors more than the Mafex one. There's nothing wrong with the Mafex one, and if that is your preferred look for Spider-Man, then obviously the Mafex one is going to be the one that you lean towards. But as far as like objectively which one executed their job better, I would say that it's almost pretty even because neither one of them is perfect. Like, they're both really good, but they both have flaws. So it's really just a matter of choice, which era of Spider-Man that you want to represent. And I don't think there's any wrong answer as far as overall look and design goes. As far as the accessories go, the Mafex one completely destroys this category because the Marvel Legends one really doesn't come with all that much. He does come with 2 sets of hands, including a pair of fists and a set of thwipping hands, and then he also comes with 2 different heads, and both head sculpts are very nice. They both have like an old school Spider-Man vibe to them, so I do like them, but I wish that he came with some more accessories. The big thing that he's missing is wall crawling hands. If he would have had that, then, you know, I think he would have pretty much had everything that he needed, but they could have gone beyond that and given us like all kinds of cool stuff like web effects or like an unmasked Peter Parker head, like a backpack. They could have given us like all kinds of good stuff with the Spider-Man. So I mean, they kind of dropped the ball as far as the accessories go. I get it, it's part of the retro wave, so they don't like to stuff a bunch of things in there, and I'm sure we'll get like a deluxe Spider-Man one of these days with all kinds of cool stuff. But as it is right now, this Spider-Man didn't come with that much, and I wish that he had some wall crawling hands, then I would have been happy with it. But as far as the Mafex one goes, he comes with a ridiculous amount of accessories, and he pretty much has every single thing that you'd want in a Spider-Man figure. Multiple sets of hands, a bunch of web accessories, he has a Peter Parker head, 2 different masked heads, and then he even has like magnetized feet, so you could like stick them on your refrigerator or whatever you want to do. So that's really cool too. Mafex always goes all out with the accessories. So in this category, Marvel Legends really did not stand a chance. And as far as scale goes, either one of these figures can work perfectly fine in your 6-inch display. I will say that Mafex has a problem with scale just in general. It seems like they're all over the place with it. It's very inconsistent. As you can see, the Miles Morales figure is too big. The Venom figure is too small. I love both of those figures like individually, but as far as trying to put them along with this Spider-Man, you're going to have some trouble because the scale on those 2 figures is just like all over the place. But luckily, Spider-Man is just a good 6-inch scale Spider-Man figure, so you could put him with other lines. He definitely works with Marvel Legends figures, so that's a good thing. And same thing could be said for the Marvel Legends Spider-Man. Obviously, he works with Marvel Legends, but you could also put him with other lines, just not with Mafex. But it's not any fault of the figure itself. It's because the Mafex scaling system is all screwed up. You know, they're like, kind of reminds me of Diamond Select sometimes, where some of their figures are too big, some of their figures are too small. It just doesn't work. But as far as these Spider-Man figures themselves, I think you could pretty much put them into any other 6-inch display other than Mafex. But yeah, so, you know, they're interchangeable in that regard. And now for the articulation, we do have some interesting things going on here. I will tell you right off the top that the Mafex one does have more points of articulation, but I feel like the Marvel Legends one has a lot of good stuff going on. And to be honest with you, I think the Legends version could pretty much achieve any pose that the Mafex version can. It might take you a little bit more patience, a little bit more work, and some more skill, so you might have to practice to be able to do it, but the potential's definitely there. It's just not as smooth as the Mafex one. But yeah, they're pretty even in terms of possibilities when it comes to your posing, but there's a lot of similarities in the articulation setup between these two figures, and there's a lot of differences. But let's go ahead and discuss what's the same, and then we'll talk about the things that aren't. So first off, they both have ball jointed shoulders, even though they are a little different from each other. They both have upper bicep swivel, they both have double jointed elbows, they both have drop down hips, and then they both have double jointed knees, and that's pretty much where the similarities stop. As far as the differences go, starting with the head, the Marvel Legends one has just a ball joint at the head, so it doesn't really get that much movement, and I really don't like this new Marvel Legends neck setup that they've been using recently. It's not very good. I really wish that they just would have had a ball hinge joint in there, and I think that would have been perfect for Spider-Man. Luckily, they did cut out a little notch from the back of the neck so you can move the head back a little bit, but I feel like that was a last minute addition that they just threw in because they realized that the neck setup wasn't very good. And then for the Mafex one, you have your typical head and neck setup. You have movement where the upper neck meets the head and then where the lower neck meets the torso, and I really like that head and neck setup. You get a lot of really good movement out of that. You could get some really expressive poses, head side to side, head up and down, all of that good stuff. So the head and neck area is definitely superior on the Mafex one. And then the shoulders are a little different as well. The Marvel Legends one has your typical Marvel Legends style butterfly shoulders, which work really good on this figure, and I do like them a lot, but I prefer the shoulder setup on the Mafex one because you could bring the shoulders up and down, and it just gives you more options, and you still have that butterfly type of joint. But I will say that the Marvel Legends one actually gets a little bit more range going back with the butterfly joint, so that's kind of interesting. But both of them have a pretty good shoulder setup, but I do prefer the Mafex shoulders. And then moving down into the torsos, both of them have a diaphragm cut, but the Marvel Legends one has a diaphragm cut and an ab crunch, and I feel like he gets a lot more range in the torso than the Mafex one does. The Mafex one pretty much has a ball joint at the torso and then a ball joint at the waist, and that is a really cool articulation setup. The torso does get some really good movement, but I feel like we get some more range out of the Marvel Legends one, especially crouching forward, which is really important for Spider-Man. So I do feel like I like the torso a little bit more on the Marvel Legends one. Both of them have drop down hips and they work very well on both figures, but they are a little different from each other. The Mafex one has your typical import style drop down hips where the upper thigh swivel is kind of hidden inside the hip. It doesn't get as much movement. You can't move the leg like all the way around, otherwise the leg is going to pop off. But with the Marvel Legends one, you have the thigh cut on the upper thigh right beneath the hips, and you can move those a lot. You could turn them all the way around if you want. You get a little bit more movement there, but it does break up the sculpt a little bit, so it's a give and take. But I would say it's pretty much even as far as the drop down hips are executed, and I think that's huge for the Marvel Legends one because that's kind of new for them, but that is really, really dope. And then moving down to the lower legs, things get different down there too. The Marvel Legends one has a lower boot cut, the Mafex one does not, but the Mafex version does get its swivel at the ankle itself because it does have a ball joint, so they're pretty much even in terms of functionality. But then now we get down to the feet, and that's really where Mafex pulls ahead because he has articulated toes and the Marvel Legends one does not. But as I said, you could still pretty much get him into any pose that the Mafex one can get into, so it's not a huge deal, but I think it would have been an awesome thing if they would have included the toe hinge on this figure. That's pretty much the only articulation point that he's missing, and that's really what gives the edge to the Mafex one, because other than that, they're pretty much even, and that's huge for Marvel Legends because that's awesome that the articulation on a domestic figure is competing with an import figure. That is really, really cool. But at the end of the day, if I had to choose and say which one had better articulation, I'm going to have to say that the Mafex one does, only because he's a little bit easier to manipulate. The shoulders add some more like dynamic posing possibilities, and then he has the toe articulation. But the Marvel Legends one is really good, and you could pretty much do everything that the Mafex one can. So, you know, if someone came along and said that they feel like the Marvel Legends articulation is better, I don't think I'd put up a huge argument, but I would just kind of disagree. Okay, so before I tell you exactly which one of these two figures I like more, let me go ahead and give you a quick recap. So as far as the overall look goes, I think that both of them do a very good job of capturing a classic look for Spider-Man, but personally, I think the Marvel Legends one looks a little bit better, mostly because it appeals to me more and it represents like my ideal version of Spider-Man. I was a big fan of the animated series and I like old school Spider-Man artwork, and I feel like the Marvel Legends one represents that better. But I can't sit here and objectively say that it looks better than the Mafex one. If you prefer like the 90s comic style, McFarlane era, or even more modern looking Spider-Man, then I think the Mafex one is for you. But for me personally, the Marvel Legends one looks better and it appeals to me more. And I also like the colors a lot more on the Marvel Legends one. That's one thing I think where it stomps on the Mafex one, because the Mafex one chose that weird blue. It's okay, it's kind of grown on me, but it's not my ideal blue for Spider-Man. I personally prefer the darker solid blue on the Marvel Legends one. So like I said, as far as the look goes, I'm going to give it to the Marvel Legends one. And then as far as the accessories go, there is no competition. The Mafex one wins by a lot. He has everything that you'd want with the Spider-Man figure. The Marvel Legends one has a couple of cool things, but they really should have packed some more in there, and I really hope that they come around and do like a deluxe version of this Spider-Man with a bunch of different hands and a Peter Parker head and different like artist style masks and all that cool stuff. They could really go all out with it, and I hope that Hasbro brings that to us. As of right now, this guy was really lacking in accessories, and the Mafex one completely destroys this category. And then for scale, I'm going to say that the Marvel Legends one does a better job at scaling with figures in its own line, and it's not really the Mafex Spider-Man figure's fault that the other figures in his line don't really scale that well. That's like a like a problem over at Mafex. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing. So the scale's kind of off. It doesn't really matter to me because this Mafex version of Spider-Man just works as my like 6-inch version of Spider-Man. I don't really need it to fit in with Mafex stuff, even though it would be nice. But ultimately, it kind of fails in the scale department because it doesn't work with figures in its own line. But the Marvel Legends one does. So even though I think the Mafex Spider-Man figure is a very good size for like other lines aside from Mafex, I still have to give the scale category to the Marvel Legends Spider-Man because it fits in better with figures in its own line. So that's very important. And then for the articulation, even though the Marvel Legends one has a lot of really good stuff going on, I'm going to give this category to the Mafex one. He just has more points of articulation and they're easier to use. The figure is very like finger friendly. He's very easy to pose around and mess with, and like I said, he has more points of articulation. I like the head and neck setup way better than the Marvel Legends one. I like the shoulders a lot better than the Marvel Legends version, and then plus he has a toe bend, which is really good for Spider-Man figures. I will say that the Marvel Legends one does have better range in the torso, and the ab crunch and diaphragm joint work really well together, and you get a little bit more movement than you do out of the Mafex one, and because of that you could get him into a deeper crouch, which is awesome. But overall, I think the articulation is superior and it's more user-friendly on the Mafex one. So he's going to win the articulation category. Alright, so overall, even though it's 2-2 as far as categories go, I'm going to say that I feel that the Mafex Spider-Man figure is the superior figure out of the two. The Marvel Legends one is really, really good. They're really, really close. But ultimately, I feel like the Mafex one is better. He just feels like more high quality. It feels like an import figure. The Hasbro figures, they're always going to feel like Hasbro figures unless they make some changes, like figure out a way to get rid of paint rub and then, cover up the pins and just give them that extra high quality feel. If this guy had the pinless technology and zero paint rub, then I would have given it to the Marvel Legends one, especially for the price. I tried not to talk about price up until this point because I just wanted to compare the figures like fair and square. But if we're talking about value, then the Marvel Legends one is definitely a better value, even though it doesn't come with all those accessories and bells and whistles, and it still feels like a domestic Hasbro figure. It's still worth it. It's still really good. And if you don't already have the Mafex figure, I would say that it doesn't make sense to try to get the Mafex figure, even though he's a little bit better than the Legends one. I think it would make more sense for you just to get the Legends figure if you're torn between these two. Yes, the Mafex one is slightly better, but I feel like the Marvel Legends one is a better value, and it's right up there in terms of quality, so you really can't go wrong with that. But yeah, like I said, I really hope to see a re-release of this Spider-Man figure, but for now, I'm going to say that the Mafex one is still the king of the 6-inch Spider-Man figures, but Hasbro has potential to dethrone him, so hopefully we see that happen pretty soon. But anyways, I think that's it. Please let me know in the comments which one of these two figures you like the most, and also please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Thank you very much. Peace.